Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today to our part two of our webinar series on empowering patient groups in rare disease research. I'm Gabriel. I'm the projects officer at Beacon. And yeah, thank you, everyone, for coming. So we'll start now. Of course, first, we're going to do some housekeeping. Of course, we will be using Zoom today. So just as a reminder, there's a chat box where you can put anything you like. And then there's a raise hand option that you won't be using unless you really want to. And then for questions, you'll be using the Q&A box that you can submit your questions to, or similarly, you can also type them in the chat and we'll be able to answer them throughout the webinar or at the very end, or even typing as well. If you'd like to use subtitles, this is possible on Zoom as well. The way you would do it is through going to live transcript and turning them on, and you can also turn them off if they become really annoying as well. So it's completely up to you on your side. And a brief introduction to us at Beacon for anyone in the room that hasn't heard of us before or are not really sure of what we do or what this webinar is. Beacon is a UK-based charity that focuses on rare diseases. We have a vision of a world in which no one faces the rare journey alone. And we have a mission to build a united rare disease community with patient groups at its heart. And there's three different ways in which we aim to achieve this. One of them is through patient group training, by supporting patient groups to form, to grow, and to professionalize, and empowering patient groups to provide emotional and practical support to their communities. We also are involved in rare research by helping patient groups find a place at the heart of research so that they can ensure better outcomes and improve access. And ultimately, we want to create this rare community that's unified by facilitating connections and collaborations to help grow and strengthen the rare disease community. So today's team is Hannah Harvey, our projects manager, who will be helping you in the chat. She'll be dealing with any tech issues that you might have. Obviously, myself, Gabriel, who's projects officer. Then we also have Eve, who's our scientific projects manager, Megan, our senior scientific projects officer, and last but not least, Rick, who is our CEO and who will also be speaking today. So why this webinar series? Well, this webinar series because 80% of rare conditions lack approved treatments. And that means that accelerating research progress is a top priority for many patient organizations. This also means that funding is absolutely essential to drive these efforts. And because funders prioritize the use of real-world evidence in applications, this means that patient groups are essential. However, navigating research funding can be really challenging. So we thought having this webinar series would be really helpful to try and tackle this and raise awareness. We had a part one of this webinar that happened on the 12th of December, 2024, where we covered the types of research that you could support beyond clinical trials. We also covered different funding streams that are available, such as government bodies or commercial funding from industry. And we also covered some opportunities and some limitations that are associated with each funding stream. Today, we will move on to discuss how patient insights can actually diversify academic ideas and also strengthen grant applications. We'll delve into practical ways to support researchers with patient engagement requirements, and we'll also finalize with some practical steps that you can take now as a patient group to ensure your group is ready to contribute meaningfully to research applications. So we'll have three wonderful speakers with us today. So thank you for taking part of this webinar. First, we'll have Rick, who I just introduced, is our CEO here at Beacon for Rare Diseases. We will also have Katie Waller, who's the head of patient programs at the Lilly Foundation. And we'll also have Katrina Manville from the Association of Medical Research Charities, also known as AMRC, who's the Director of Research Policy. So thank you for joining today. And lastly, I'll just go quickly through the agenda so that everyone knows what to expect today. Just after this, I'll hand over to our CEO, Rick. He'll give you an overview of the critical role of patient groups in research funding. Then Katie Waller will talk about their experience joining a collaborative funding bid as a patient organization in the Lilly Foundation. Then Katrina Manville will give examples of patient involvement shaping research priorities and funding and her experience in AMRC. And lastly, we'll have Rick again talk about practical steps for patient groups to get involved in research. Questions and answers will be monitored by us throughout the webinar. We'll try and answer as many as possible, but obviously due to time constraints, we'll probably be answering a lot of them at the very end and typing in the chat as well. But please feel free to go on the Q&A box and submit any questions you might have. Thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to Rick now. I'm just going to stop sharing and I'm just going to let you share now, Rick. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gabrielle. Right, let's get this share working, everybody. I will share the screen there. And let's see how we go. Lovely to be here. You can hear me and see me, which is good. It's been a little while since I've done too many webinars, but it's always good fun and something I really enjoy doing. So today my aim is hopefully to share some of my thoughts and some experience on how patient groups can contribute and dive into the research process. And I'm going to probably have quite a strategic view in looking at this, but also try and highlight some of the specific things that you might see or expect to see in the ways you're asked to contribute to these types of projects. So I'll cover off the aims. Firstly, I'm going to start just to look at the basics. What are the incentives behind patient groups supporting research funding applications? Why would you want to do it? Why would people want you to do it? And how does that interplay actually inform what you should get involved with? Hopefully then just cover off quickly where and how you can bring value to these type of processes. And there's a huge range of different ways that I believe patient groups can influence research, whether through funding applications or delivery itself. I then want to review the types of applications that you might be asked to support or you might find yourselves having to support, and thinking about the ways you might be able to contribute to them meaningfully, both at the application stage, but also again at the delivery stage. And then just briefly trying to spend a few minutes exploring what reviewers might be looking for when they're looking at the applications you've done, because it's always good to bear in mind, as in exams, what the marker is looking for when you're writing your answers. So we'll try and dive in. I've spent a while thinking about these, having seen Eve's excellent presentations last time. I'm feeling immense pressure to do a good job today, so fingers crossed this works for you. Right, so why support academic grants? This is really obvious and easy, but fundamentally, as patient organisations in the rare disease space, one of your top aims is to get more research done about your disease and bring more money into your landscape to get better quality research done about your disease. And that goes without saying. This fundamental desire to get more money in and research going might at times create a sense of pressure to support anything and everything you see. And I'd urge against being too quick to dive into any given research project that comes across your path, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. What's also important in this process is to give you a chance to have a seat at the table. If you can support academic grants in a meaningful way, that means you can share patient insights and help to direct the research in the channel that actually is going to benefit the patient community themselves, rather in the thing that the researcher is most interested in. And that's when you're going to generate real meaningful impact for your community. And something that may not always be obvious, but is very important, is you have the chance to access funding for your charity. This isn't always going to come up, but there are ways and means in which you can get that access to funding with certain projects, and you should never be shy of trying to secure that. So why then do academics want your support? And this is a three boxes to summarize different options. On the one end, I'm going to have the very cynical, and the other a somewhat more optimistic and positive view of this. And we probably need to recognize that all three of these incentives are at play at different scenarios. Cynically, academic researchers may have been told that they need to get patient input by their funder or the institution. It's a necessity for it to happen, and that may be quite simply the reason they're engaging. We have to recognise that at times. It may be, however, that they believe that input will help them to secure the funding. And this is a much better situation because there's an incentive for them to actually want to work with you, to listen to you in order to secure the support that they're looking for. Thirdly, and the one we want to see, and I think are increasingly seeing, is that the researchers believe that it will improve the quality and impact of their research. And doing that will improve their chances, therefore, of getting more research and having impact as they move forward. And that's really the zone we're really hoping to be in these kind of situations. So if you are approached to support an academic application, you do have a choice about whether to engage. And I believe that choice should be based around the interplay of these different incentives. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And is that actually aligned with your goals, what they're doing? And what do you think the motivation of the academic is? Clearly, having a prior relationship with the researcher will really help you to understand what's going on there and give you more confidence about the research that's been done. And these things will also affect your expectations of the interaction. And sometimes the more you know, the clearer those expectations will be, and the less likely you're going to have a disappointment in the outcome. What I'd recommend, though, is in a good situation, if you're approached, you can have more confidence if you're getting really clear, open communication and discussion, because that's going to build trust and clarity between yourself and the academic and the research they're trying to do. And hopefully they're doing that relatively early. You will often find you may get approached the week or the day before a deadline. And in that case, you don't have a lot of chance to bear influence or support there. It feels like a more transactional interaction. What you want is that early engagement with open discussion, because that gives you the chance potentially for co-creation or to influence the research itself. So that's the kind of background of why and how you might think about engaging. So how then can you add value? And I think there are three major areas, in my opinion, and I'll stress this is my opinion, where patient organisations and charities can influence the research landscape. The first of those, and relatively obviously, is funding. And we're not going to talk too much about that in this webinar. We may follow up in the future. But I'm sure, as Katrina will no doubt mention later, there's a huge contribution from medical research charities in the UK towards the medical research landscape. But a really big chunk of the research out there is funded by charities. So many will be approached asking for support for research projects, or may fund them themselves. There's a second bucket of ways that I think a lot of activity happens in at the moment, and that broadly falls under this acronym of PPIE, patient and public involvement and engagement. It's a really broad term that can mean lots of different things. When I think about this, I tend to think it's focused much more on that communication, dissemination, and explanation piece in terms of the way you can engage with research. The aim is generally to demonstrate the impact of the science they're talking about to society and ensure its relevance is reflected. The third area, which I'm really interested in myself, and I think is more prevalent and pertinent in the world of rare diseases, is actually finding ways that the patient community can influence the design of research, actually review the research process to improve it, or even help to co-create that research itself. And there you'll hopefully have the chance to bring patient perspective into the research plan to make sure that the outcomes and the impact are of maximum relevance to your patient community. And that's where we all really want to be, if possible. Now, there's a kind of value chain throughout this kind of research space, and I'm probably broadly here talking mostly about medical research that might be moving towards therapies, but similar principles do apply to any other type of research that you might want to look at. Generally, you've got a stage of research design, you've got the establishment of existing data and resources that can be used to support the development of that research. You have the clinical research space, and then the stage where you're trying to make sure that the results of that research are accessible to the patient community and implemented in a way that makes them effective and successful. And I think there are multiple places along this pathway where patient advocacy groups and charities like yourselves can impact the process. That will be in funding, but also in actually delivery. I'll try and go through these quite quickly because many of them will be very familiar to you. A clear one, and one we'll touch on more later, I believe, is around defining your research priorities. And the James Lind Alliance priority setting partnerships are a really cool example of this type of approach. You're trying to say, what is it that our community needs to see moving in the research space to lead to an improvement and impact for them? This can be supported by providing evidence that a research question will really impact the community that fits in the same place, as does the definition of that unmet need within your community itself. And obviously in this space, co-funding is a logical place where you can help change the shape of design and research itself. When you're looking at existing data resources, this is about providing access to patients and their lived experience. It might be about sharing and diving into registry data, as we had an example of in webinar 2 from the International Name and PIC registry, webinar 1, sorry. It'll be about the awareness of that broad international patient landscape and the research landscape. Lots of patient groups know a lot of people and can drive collaborations in a space that wouldn't otherwise happen with researchers on their own. And it might be generating access to patient samples through biobanks or connections with the patients themselves. And a particular important area right now is driving that inclusivity and diversity in the research that's done. In the realm of clinical research, patient groups can help design and evaluate trial protocols, improve the ways trial sites are set up to work better for patients, drive recruitment and retention, define endpoints, and make sure they're valid for clinical studies. Whereas in access and implementation, it can be about establishing the value of a medicine to society to really support the fact that it gets paid for. Communicating the value to the community as a whole and society, and making sure people understand why this research is necessary and how it benefits a large portion of us, as well as disseminating broad findings to the patient community itself. And often here you have to manage challenges which come up, as a number of examples talked to here. The logo of Myotubular Trust talking about some of the challenges they've had communicating outcomes and research they're engaged with in the last few years. And then finally, just generally having public engagement, advocacy, and influence on funders. These are all things that can make a huge difference and drive things forward for researchers, and things that we want to see as patient groups as a whole. Now, this isn't just an idea that I've got or that certain charities have. There are research bodies out there that are driving forward to have high standards of patient and public involvement. So if you go on the NIHR website, which is one of the major UK funders of life sciences research, in 2019, they announced this new set of standards for public involvement in research, which really drives to this point. And you can see there are core values here that talk about communication, working together, inclusivity, impact, all of which are aligned with that co-creative way of working in research that we talked about. So PAGs add value, patient groups add value in research. That's a fact. And that should show you why funders want to see this involvement and input into research. It shows you that it's mandated by the funders themselves, and it shows you where you might be best placed as an organisation to add value and influence funding applications. There'll be one or two places at least where you right now could make a difference on a study. Maybe not all of those, but some of those are places you could really change the situation. So if you want to do that, if you should do that, if you've got a capacity to do that, what is it you might be asked to do? And that's what I'll try and spend the rest of my talk going through. So I think there are a few different types of funding out there that you might access. And again, Eve touched on this in her prior webinar. The first one is industry funding or investment. The second one are grant applications. And the third is kind of a subset of that, grant applications, which are consortium bids. These are generally grants which are quite a large chunk of funding that's designed to be spread across a wide range of different stakeholders, often with different types of expertise. For industry funding, it's clear that industry are increasingly viewing patient input as a necessary step to help them reach market. What that means is they're trying to find ways to get their drug sold effectively to patients to recoup their investment. What industry are looking to do, therefore, is to de-risk the development, make the development of drugs less of a risk, more likely to go to market. Yeah, and they can do that by working with patients either to refine that research design to ensure that the patient impact is real, or by engaging with that community to really help drive the recruitment into their studies to make sure they don't fail because they can't find the patients they need, which is very, very much a risk in the rare disease space. Obviously, any collaborations or work with industry is likely to be more biased towards that clinical stage or after clinical stage. And it's fair to say that if there is any kind of financial return to the group providing the insight, that the charity itself is probably going to be paid for on a consultancy basis. You might get some kind of fair market value for your time, but it's far less likely you'll be able to enter into a partnership into the research study in this space for various reasons we won't waste time on today. In grant applications, you've got a different structure. Basically, there's a funding body that have launched a bid for a little specific period of time. It'll be called a call, and that's going to focus on a specific research area. It is going to be driven by that research area and target. There'll be a certain amount of funding available for a certain period of time, both to apply for it and to hold the grant, to deliver the work. And there'll be specific outcomes you need to meet to deliver for that grant giver. The applications are likely to be quite formulaic, and what you'll see is because grants are a major generator of academic income, for universities, they kind of know how to go filling these forms in and going through that process. So you'll be at a disadvantage as a patient group trying to write for that kind of bid versus the institution. So you need to work together to tap into their expertise, but also to feed your knowledge into it. There can be one applicant or multiple applicants, but there's generally a primary lead investigator. And many grants these days require some form of patient engagement plan or patient involvement. So I went to have a little snook around last night to see what different bids are out there, and I found one for the NIHR for James Lind Alliance Priority Setting Partnerships, which is quite a cool fund to see available. And what I noticed in this bid is it's clearly something that you could see patient groups contributing to, because it's about understanding a landscape. It includes a lead applicant, but joint lead applicants and co-applicants. So it's really open to multiple funders. And the initial application requires quite simple things of a research plan, which has a certain structure with NIHR, a good clear summary, and declaration of conflicts. This is the kind of bid you might be able to chip into or work in partnership to move forward yourselves. And you can find out more information on the slide here. On consortium bids, I've mentioned a little bit already, but they are really about grants that are seeking a large collaboration between different partners to bring different expertise into the fold. And it's likely that PAGS could be a part of that. These are complex to plan. There's lots of people involved. So they can be susceptible to politics, and you're going to have lots of different targets to deliver on different timelines. So don't walk into something like this without expecting that. But they can be really rich and rewarding and impactful if they happen. And these are often a model that you see in EU projects and EU funding, if that's a space that you're likely to move into at any stage. So another example I want to touch on, again, we'll be looking at throughout the webinar, is the LifeArc Rare Disease Translational Research Centres, which were a project that were, I think, launched in 2023, and the bids were finalised and awarded in 24. Basically, this is LifeArc. It's a charity based here in the UK, focused on translational research, wanting to fund multiple different centres around the UK to drive forward rare disease therapy development. And they put £40 million up to try and fund multiple centres, as you can see from this screen grab here. And what you notice if you go through that original grant call is there are lots of different places and terms that really hint at a need to collaborate effectively with the patient community to be successful in the bid. Clearly, you can see that they're talking about they need to understand and demonstrate unmet need. They want the centre to become a central point for engagement with the patient community. They want to increase the understanding of rare disease patients with industry and policymakers. They want to have really well thought out PPIE strategies, and they want to demonstrate that harmonisation with the existing resources that are out there and existing experts out there. And hopefully we're all aware that in rare diseases, patient communities are often one of the major experts in that given condition. So while they didn't explicitly call out you need to have or should have a partner, this is clearly something that's implied that patient collaboration is going to be crucial to deliver a successful grant on this project. Here you can see some of the kind of parameters for this kind of grant, again, to give you some insight of how they're structured. But again, you see what you have is a window when that funding is open, broadly speaking, from April through to the end of May for expression of interest, and then the final application is finished at the end of September. The grant was then decided towards the end of December and then awarded in September of the next year. So quite a long window for this type of funding. What this generated was a hell of a lot of different applications, as you'd expect if someone's going to try and throw £40 million around. And many different approaches from those applications to the way they engaged with the patient communities, which I'll touch some ideas on in a minute. Ultimately, 4 centres were funded, one of which we're going to hear from a little bit later. And all of those centres do include a partner rare disease charity that's receiving some long-term funding applications, funding within that project, and they have deliverables and things they have to do to engage with this research. So it's a really interesting and unique opportunity for those groups to influence the research space and be part of a funding landscape. Okay, how are we doing? Now we're on to thinking about what your contribution might be in these types of bids. And one very simple thing you might be able to do is write a letter of support. Another will be to provide advice and input into part of a study itself. And the third will be to be a co-creative partner or collaborator in one of these projects. And again, there are very different parameters in these different areas. A letter of support is a really simple thing. It's a letter that you're writing that's submitted alongside a grant application, and it's designed to lend your name and therefore your influence to that application. Hopefully, it's going to help to highlight the impact, the relevance, or the importance of this research to your community, and that's what you're trying to do with a letter of support. So, a letter of support is a really simple way to provide support to a project, probably one that you're lacking currently, either the skills or the capacity to actually partner with and influence a lot. It's a simple way that you can get behind a project to try and inspire that funding into the space. But But it's really important to know that if you're using this approach, you're not going to be part of that grant. You can have very little influence on the grant and the way it's delivered, and you won't receive any funding through doing it. This is you putting your name to something. And in those situations, I'd recommend that you take the time to understand the project. Make sure you're asking questions yourself and see, is it aligned with the strategy that you have as an organisation to change the landscape for patients? I'd write your own letter. Some people will give you a letter to sign, but I'd write your own letter that allows you to actually specify and highlight the strengths that you see in the project and the benefits to the community as you see them. Use your words if you're putting your name to something. I think that brings more value. And for those people that really are going to read it and pay attention to that letter of support, I think that'll be more impactful and more meaningful. It also protects your name, if I'm honest, as well. You shouldn't ever feel pressurized to support something. You should take the time you need. And if you're asked to do this on a short-term basis without information, I'd recommend don't support it, because you don't know what it is, and your name and your reputation is what you're offering here. And I shouldn't give that away cheaply. So fundamentally, lend your name to projects you believe in, and particularly to people that you believe in as well. And I think that people piece is really important in this whole research landscape. It's a relationship game as well. And it's the relationship you build with the academic you're working with is really crucial to build the trust. And that message kind of flows through into that advice and input piece. Here, the research team are looking for your support in probably an aspect of the study, and that could be delivering or designing a patient engagement plan. It might be recruiting people to an advisory board for their project. It could be to support recruitment. There's lots of different things, but it's probably not asking for your partnership throughout the whole research piece, and it may be a discrete area you're contributing to. This is probably one of the most common and most interesting ways for you to engage. It's nice to give a clearly defined level of involvement. Impact is therefore quite easy to assess, both on how much resource you've got to put into it, but what you'll get out of it and what your community will get out of it. And you have some influence. You've got a seat at the table, which I think is nice. But bear in mind, your remit is probably limited, and the impact too. So you're not going to have a total say about how things are done. So in this space, again, just get to know the researchers you're working with, because that's going to tell you how they're going to respond to your feedback. And make sure you just understand your remit really early on in the project. What's the scope, and agree what that is, because the sooner you know that, the sooner you can deliver effectively and appreciate what you need to do to make it work. It's a really great way to influence research, short-term and long-term, but make sure the projects you support meet your goals and are relevant to you as an organisation and a community. And wherever possible with this type of engagement, try and secure some measure of compensation for your time and expertise. It's always tempting to, as a charity and a charitable organisation, to work for free to support a cause you want, and sometimes that's the only option. But if there are options to secure funding and reimbursement, please try and do that to recognise your value. Finally, this co-creation and collaboration piece. And like I say, here they're really looking for a partner to help design and develop the project as a whole. They're much rarer opportunities, but they're going to have a really high burden and really high impact, and you need to plan for them as such. You've got significant influence on the study design in these projects, and you can deliver a big part of the work yourself, which is really exciting, and you can have a real funding opportunity for your organisation, which is great. But yeah, nothing creeps in scope like a collaborative project. You get more people around the room, more ideas fire off, and before you know it, you're doing twice the work you expected. So do be prepared to plan for that. So collaborative projects, whether it's about doing the bid or the delivery, they're going to live or die based on the trust and communication you have between all the partners. So really make the effort early on to get to know your collaborators and demonstrate your value to them early and your expectations. I think that's crucial to make a success. Really try hard to budget well. These projects will need you to submit a budget, a meaningful budget, and don't be too conservative in what you're budgeting, because scope will creep naturally. Set goals and milestones on these type of projects that you believe you can deliver, that are impactful and matter to your community, but are within your remit and reach. And try as much as you can to view yourself as an equal partner and expect to be treated as such. We did a collaborative project a while back, and in truth, I don't think I went into that project viewing myself and Beacon as an equal partner to the wider consortium, and I never really felt that we demanded the right things and got the right outcomes from it as a consequence to that. And because the tone wasn't set right at the start, it set us back later. So it's really important to view yourself in that way, because you can contribute a huge amount. An example I want to touch on here is the Remedy for All consortium. So Beacon are a partner within this consortium. This is an absolutely sprawling research project trying to drive forward repurposing. in Europe, and not just for rare diseases, but for the whole area. So to give you an insight into this type of project, we were invited to discuss it in the early summer of 2021, and that led to me attending Zoom calls for about a 3-month period for probably at least a quarter of my time a week throughout that 3-month period. It was very intensive to plan that project. We were involved in designing 2 of the 13 different work streams as part of this project as a major collaborator, and we also contributed to 3 other work streams in that time. We had to provide an estimate of the time we'd need for a 5-year project based on these conversations, and an idea of the budgetary needs to do that as well. We had to evaluate other potential partners in the project that came on later on. And we were very fortunate in this project in actually the majority of the grant writing was dealt with by the coordinating partner and a consulting firm that they brought on to really help deliver the project itself. But there could have been a much higher burden of writing in this type of project. There was a 3-month wait for the decision after that period. There was then no funding officially awarded until September 23, but it wasn't delivered to our charity until January 23. So yeah, there was over a 3 or 4 month period we were doing work without being paid by the grant giver themselves. And it's a really important thing to be aware of in these projects. They can be slow to kick in, but when they kick in, it makes a difference to you as an organisation. Benefits are clear to us because we secured 5 years of funding as a charity. We're leading and driving 2 work streams, but crucially, we're actually helping to push forward a type of research and repurposing that we've been working and advocating for 8 years prior to this in a really meaningful way. And that's the value that this can bring to our cause as a charity as well as to us as an institution. Cool. So this is a summary table that just really looks through all these things. I won't go into it because we're short on time now, but fundamentally the message here is writing a letter of support is a low impact way for you to contribute, but you don't get a huge amount back, and you shouldn't expect a huge amount back from that contribution. And as you're moving into that kind of co-creative space, you're going to have much more intensity in the grant writing process as well as the delivery process, and you need to be able to deliver the project you're asking about. There's different things you're risking in different places, and understanding that is crucial to your success. Okay, finally, a quick word on reviewers. The people that influence things in these funding calls are going to be the funder themselves and the people that are asking to review the bids. And I think a key question to try and ask if you're engaging in any type of funding bid is there an expert patient or PPIE reviewer part of the grant panel? You may or may not be able to find this out, but if you can, I think it can make a difference of how you think about packaging the work you're doing. I think just because there's someone friendly to PPIE on there doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be biased towards you. They're actively not. They're going to be keen to uphold actively the very highest standards of patient engagement, so be aware of that and work towards it. If there's no one on there that's a PPIE expert, then I think you focus on substantiating the need of this research. What impact will it have to your community? And that's a place you can really add value and strengthen the application. And make sure there's a really clear plan for patient engagement. Do the basics and doing really well. If there is a patient engagement expert, do all the same things, but really make sure that that work is very well funded for the patient engagement, so it looks realistic and viable. Try and show that it's based on evidence. So what evidence have you got to demonstrate the need? What research have you done? What does the community say? Bring the voice into the projects. And for me, crucially, try and make sure that piece that you write looks like the patient engagement work, or the part that the grant writer and the patient collaborator have done together feels like there's a collaboration. Make sure it doesn't feel like the PPI is bolted on the side, because that can make it look tokenistic, and that will probably not trigger well with the person reviewing the PPI work. It won't be your fault, but they're judging the whole grant and not the PPI itself. They want to see this as an integrated piece to the whole process. So try and bear that in mind, and try and encourage in any project to make sure it is integrated into the whole work stream. Right, I've gone a smidge over, but not too bad. Not as I thought I might be, so I'm happy with myself. In summary, you guys in patient groups can have a real impact and bring real value to research projects, whether writing grants or delivering projects. You're going to want to support anything and everything you see, particularly early on in your development. Try and have a clear strategy you're working towards, and try and be sure that you know anything you are supporting meets that strategy. avoid people that want to seek tokenistic engagements. It's not worth your time. You want to build relationships and partnerships to gain influence in the research process for the good of your community. And never underestimate your value or the resources you're going to need to deliver a project effectively. If you do all that, you're going to have a huge influence, huge impact in the research space. Sorry for being a bit long, but thank you very much. And if there's time, I'll take questions. And if not, I'll take questions at the end. How are we doing for time, Gabrielle?
Hi, thank you, Rick. That was really insightful. I'm sure that a lot of people, if not everyone, will find that really, really useful. So thank you for sharing so many recommendations, advice, and from your experience as well. So thank you. I was thinking that maybe we could move on and have Katie, and then we can address questions at the end of it. Thank you.
So I'll briefly introduce Katie then. And Katie, thank you so much for being here. So as I've talked about a lot of different stuff there, one of the things I was hinting at was the Life Art Rare Disease Translational Research Project. And Katie Waller is a representative of Lilly, who are one of the partners on one of these bids, which I've been really enjoying working with a little bit over the past few months. So Katie's going to share some of their experiences trying to set up Lilly as an organisation that can drive research influence, but also the reflections on being part of that bid process. So Katie, thank you so much and welcome.
Brilliant. Okay, so Rick, thank you for the lovely introduction. So yes, I'm Katie Waller. I'm the head of patient programs at the Lilly Foundation. And as Rick's already said, we've recently been part of the successful funding bid for the new LifeArc Centre for Rare Mitochondrial Diseases. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the role that we played in the bid and how we will use our status as a patient advocacy organisation to ensure that PPIE, or patient and public involvement and engagement, is embedded into the centre as a whole. So if you could move on, Gabrielle, that would be great. So just to tell you a little bit of the background about the Lilly Foundation and how we felt we were well placed to be kind of collaborative partners in this bid. So we are the largest UK charity supporting people with mitochondrial disease, and we support people from the diagnosis of mito all the way through to end of life and beyond. And the charity's been going since 2007, and really from the very beginning, funding cutting edge research into mitochondrial disease has always been one of Lilly's key objectives as a charity. So when our CEO and founder, Liz Curtis, lost her little girl, Lily, to mitochondrial disease in 2007, the research landscape was really very different to how it is today. When Liz lost Lily, there was very little known about mitochondrial disease, and research into the condition was really in its infancy. So even getting a genetic diagnosis of mito was very, very difficult, never mind thinking about trying to move towards treatments. And in the 18 years that have passed since, I think Lilly have really been instrumental in driving change across both research into mito, but also in terms of patient advocacy. And I think they've really led the charge with that. So thinking about research first, Lilly have invested research in two key areas historically, so diagnostics of mitochondrial disease and into developing treatments that will hopefully have direct patient benefit in the future. And along the way, we've worked hard to build some really great relationships with the professionals who are working both clinically and in the research space. And we've been really lucky that we've been able to invest around £3 million on projects that have the potential to benefit our patients. And one of our kind of key successes was one of our very earliest projects, which was our Lilly exome sequencing project. Before the exome sequencing project, mitochondrial disease was tested via single genes that were kind of tested in different labs around the world. So getting a diagnosis was very difficult. Whereas the Lilly exome sequencing project was the first opportunity for patients to have their whole exome sequenced for mitochondrial mutations. I mean, it was actually so successful as a pilot that over 70% of the patients who were enrolled in that trial actually achieved a genetic diagnosis. And it was so successful that that testing program was taken up by the NHS. So it's part of the NHS testing pipeline. So that's kind of just one example of how Lilly have led the charge in terms of research. And then away from sort of direct research, we know that our community is really our biggest strength as a charity. So we support around 1,300 families with mitochondrial disease. And we have learned over the years that when we harness the power of the patient voice, incredible things can really happen. Some of you might have heard about mitochondrial donation in the news. a few years ago now, and it had kind of a negative press around some of the concerns around Frankenstein science or three-parent babies. And we were able to use our patient stories and voices to show that actually, this was a really important, safe, meaningful campaign. And we were able to kind of use personal patient stories to change public perception, excuse me, around the importance of the pioneering treatment. And we were fundamental in actually changing the law around this. So we also have quite a demonstrable track record of patient engagement. We on our website, we do interviews, news pieces, and we also have in-person events at our residential events, patient information days, where we kind of share news and get behind the science of mitochondrial disease. Oh, sorry. And all of this has really helped establish Lilly as a key player in helping to drive research and patient advocacy, not just nationally, but also internationally. And that's something that we're really proud of as a charity. Could you move on, Gabrielle? And I'll just have a little sip of water. Thank you. So in terms of the LifeArc bid itself, Lilly were invited to join the bid as equal collaborative partners. So we were asked to take responsibility for leading on the PPIE and the comms for the centre. And we were given the opportunity to directly contribute to the application and write the PPIE plan. And with that, we felt we were given the freedom to outline our vision for PPIE for the mitochondrial disease community as a whole. So it was important to us that we weren't reinventing the wheel when we were writing our strategy. And we wanted to use what we were already doing to kind of formalise some of our existing structures and programmes for patient involvement and engagement that we already had in place. So one example is that earlier last year, we'd started to build up a small patient involvement group called EPIC, which is our Expert Patient Input Committee, which gives the opportunity for our community to work alongside researchers, giving them the opportunity to share their lived experiences to help shape research design and provide their own unique perspectives to help the professionals get some sense of the real life impact of living with a mitochondrial disease. We actually are going to be relaunching EPIC as Impact, which is a new name, and we're going to time that with the launch of our LifeArc Centre. While we were already going to do that change, having the involvement with LifeArc's really given us the motivation to restructure and develop what we were already doing and where we know we wanted to take the programme next. And similarly, we knew that we wanted to continue to build on our existing programme of patient engagement. So we wanted to develop our website to include a dedicated research zone where information and knowledge about the latest developments in mitochondrial research can be shared. And again, all of these plans were already in our broader patient engagement strategy for the Lilly Foundation. But we wanted to again harness our existing plans to ensure that patient and public involvement and engagement remains at the centre of the exciting new translational research centre. And in terms of kind of by being acknowledged as partners, it's recognition that whilst the other scientists and the professionals, the academics who are responsible for delivering the cutting edge science, the Lilly Foundation feel that they're best placed to communicate these advancements with the community, given our experience with patient advocacy and our access to our community. So we were able to really shout loudly about what the centre's achieving. Next slide, please, Gabrielle. Thank you. So the funding of the LifeArc Centre for Mitochondrial Disease is really exciting for us and for the community as a whole. Our centre has three key areas that it wants to focus on. So firstly, continuing to improve diagnostics. Secondly, developing biomarkers that will help with the detection and monitoring of mitochondrial disease. And finally, hopefully developing 6 potential new treatments for patient benefit. As a translational research centre, the ambition is really to drive forward increases in understanding from within the lab that will be able to translate across to research that directly involves patients. And we feel really hopeful that the funding that's been awarded to our centre will eventually mean a step forward in our understanding of mitochondrial disease as a whole and how we begin to treat these effectively. And then obviously as patient partners, it means that we can bring our community along with us every step of the way and allow them to be involved in whatever way they wish to be. So whether that's sort of as a direct research participant, so taking part in some of the clinical trials that come out of the site, being involved in shaping kind of the research design through our impact committee, or even by just keeping up to date with the research projects as they happen through the research zone. And we really hope that the project's going to be able to enhance Lily's reputation in PPIE, and ensure that our Mito community feel educated and empowered about the research that's happening and how this research translates into meaningful outcomes for our patients in their everyday lives. So I did have just on the last one, just any time for any questions, but we can come back to that.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. That was great. Thank you for sharing your experience in the bid.
Thank you.
Yeah, Katie, really enjoyed that, and it's great to see your reflections on the process of joining that and how that kind of branched out from the work you did previously at Lily. And it's going to be very exciting over the next few years to see how the project develops. There's one quick question I'll just ask, which is coming. There's been a bit of chat already in the questions about the James Lind Alliance process that I mentioned, and someone's asking directly if Lily have been involved in one of those before this. And just your thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Yes, so there is a PSP for mitochondrial disease, and Lily patients and families were involved in that, and it was before my time, I have to admit, but it is available.
I have a suspicion we'll come back and talk a bit more about that and some of the pros and cons of that for the chat and the questions after the next presentation. But for now, Katie, thank you so much. Next up then we have Katrina Manville. So obviously you'll be aware that the Association of Medical Research Charities is a kind of body that represents and supports all the different charities in the space in the UK that are trying to drive forward medical research. And this is an area that's really important. There's a huge amount of work happening here, and I thought it'd be really valuable to invite the AMRC to this webinar to share some of their thoughts on the ways in which they've seen their members contributing to the research space. So, Katrina, thank you so much for being part of today. We're looking forward to hearing some of the examples and joining the conversation later. So, welcome.
Thank you. I managed to get my slides up, but I was still on mute and then couldn't see my own button. So, anyway, let's get going.
Thank
you. Great. So, thank you very much, Rick and the team, for having me here today. My name's Katrina and I'm the Director of Policy at AMRC. So just to give you a little bit of the background, I can get the slide to move. Let's see. Oh, and yeah, they did move at speed. So it's really nice actually to see some familiar faces on the line and to know some of your charities anyway. But here is the list of current AMRC members. So we have full members and we have introductory members. And as an organisation, we aim to support those funding medical research sort of across the board and across all disease areas. To be a member, you have to have sort of robust peer review processes, which are assessed on application and also assessed every 5 years. And those allow you to access different types of support as well for your research. So, for example, indirect cost of funding in the NHS would be one, or in some of the indirect costs of research in universities. And so we take that sort of badge of quality very seriously. So what do our members do? Well, as Rick said at the beginning, the charity sector are a massive contributor to medical research in general, and a sort of major player. So you can see the figures on the left-hand side here that last year our members invested 1.7 billion in research, which is complemented by 1.3 at NIHR and 0.9 at MRC. And they're funding all sorts of things from the basic research, the sort of underpinning mechanisms as to how this works, right through to clinical trials, implementation science, etc. So they're funding a lot of clinical studies, but they also fund the people that do this. And I think in rare disease, this is particularly critical. How do you get people interested in your area? But also, how do you understand where there might be other technology or methods or something that somebody may already be doing in the UK, which may then be able to be applied in your disease area? And yeah, I mean, if I haven't hammered it home enough, they've invested 16 billion over the last 10 years. So they are one of those major players. But they're also doing that within rare disease. And a couple of years ago, we did a piece that looked at what they were investing, and the thing that I think is quite exciting is that the map on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, sorry, here, shows the sort of percentage of investment in different places across the country, and that is no different from the sort of disease spread in any other disease of funding. So confident that we're seeing that excellent research across the UK as well. But what was interesting when we looked at it was that they're contributing half of all public investment into rare disease, funding about 2.1 billion over a 5-year period. This is excluding cancer figures as well, so it would be much higher with that. But one thing that I really took away from it is, although we've got these sort of 29 charities that are solely focused on rare disease, that the rare disease research is happening everywhere. So actually 80% of the funding going into it is not from the rare disease charities, it's from more sort of prevalent or common diseases that then have an interest in rare, or see that the mechanisms that are sort of crucial to rare diseases are also important to understanding other parts of their disease. So we've spent quite a lot of work trying to understand why charities are vital partners in UK research. And I think that this applies to you as patient organisations as well as research funders. So it's about sort of what we say is that within the ecosystem of life sciences, it's the complementarity of what patients and the public through charities can do to fund this research. So they're responding to patient priorities, which are driving the research, the missions, and what they want to achieve, tackling areas of unmet need. As Rick sort of mentioned, there are opportunities to collaborate with industry, but there are just some areas that they won't touch. And this is where the charities are often coming in, and other public funders. And they also really want to accelerate health impact. I don't need to tell anybody on this call, but patients cannot wait. And so actually driving for something, we all know it takes 20 years to get bench to bedside, but that's not acceptable to patients today. So although this is partly about hope for tomorrow, this is also about how we can improve today. So perhaps when you're thinking about what your cell is, maybe some of these words will be useful to you in those applications. So one of the things that we've thought quite a lot about at AMRC is where can patients and patient organisations and charities get involved? And I see that there is a role for patient involvement throughout all areas of research. And we have examples where our charity is supporting people with lived experience to do this across the whole pipeline. But just to give you these sort of categories of areas where you could be making a difference, there is the prioritising the research topics, and we'll go on to talk a little bit more about James Lind Alliance. Actually, the sort of decision making, so choosing what research to fund or influencing those research decisions. So often charities will have either a patient and public rep on their funding committees, or else a sort of lay panel that feeds into it. And as AMRC, it is our recommendation that they consider the diversity of voices and views that are coming into those funding decisions. And one of those could be to ensure that they have patients at the heart of it. Co-designing the research. So the number of people who've said to me, my study wouldn't have worked if the academic had just been able to go and suggest that these patients go to the hospital 3 times a week at 9 o'clock through the rush hour traffic, etc. And instead, through working with the community, I can understand that actually this could be reduced to once a week, or what would actually work for them, in which case you're going to get patients signing up, you're going to get a successful study. So it's really thinking what's our role in designing that research. There are also many examples, and I'm seeing them more and more, of actually carrying out the research. So this links back to Rick's point about becoming a co-I or a sort of co-applicant on things. And so there are examples where individuals or groups can identify what the challenges that they want to address, and actually apply for funding. And then there's sort of sharing the research. So a lot of the public involvement and engagement that happens after it to actually speak to people. We all know that the scientific community isn't best placed to explain in words that we can all understand the science that they've done. And so really challenging them on that, I think is really important to make sure that people can understand what we're talking about and why it makes a difference. Then there's also the sort of monitoring of research. And for me, this is about the accountability. You were hoping it was going to do this. It's obviously a risky endeavor. It may not pay off. But did we do everything that we could to ensure that it works? And that comes back to me, to the co-design, to making sure everything fits together. But it's also really key to think, were we ambitious enough in the impact that we wanted in the end? I've already talked about influencing those research decisions. And then finally, it's about making involvement diverse. So, what patient communities do you engage with and who could be part of this? Research isn't a word that everybody's comfortable with. And so how do we actually flip that on its head and make sure that by involvement and understanding of what goes on in research, people would then be comfortable to participate? So Rick talked a little bit about the sort of movement of the system towards recognizing the importance of this. And for me, one of the key statements and pieces in this is the shared commitment to public involvement. So funders, including all medical research charities, are committed to embedding patient and public involvement in research. And as a condition of AMRC membership, we have a statement which all members must accept about the importance of public involvement throughout research. And so I'd really encourage you to sort of signpost to this and say, this is what you have agreed to do. This is right for us to be involved in all aspects. And for me, what I love about it is it's not just, it's public involvement is important and expected and possible in all types of research. We can't shy away from saying this is difficult because it's very basic. We must be doing it in all parts. And I love the fact that the commitment is to improve the extent and quality of it so that it is consistently excellent. And so I hope that statements like this from organisations like ourselves and others actually give you something to hold us to account of and saying, you said you would involve us. How's that happening? I wanted to pick up on two specific examples, and one of them is about co-funding. So many of our members co-fund to fund the research, and you can see in the middle they're co-funding with other charities, both AMRC members and beyond, public bodies, so that would be like major government funders like the NIHR or MRC, universities and research institutes, and of course industry. And they can do this through sort of standard schemes. So on the left-hand side here, you've got the fellowships, and you've got there's some with NIHR and MRC where they co-fund in specific areas, but often it's individual one-to-one partnerships. And the example I wanted to give you is a couple of years ago, I was watching a presentation from one of our members, and they were talking about how they sort of crowded funding in. So the AMRC member, who has the sort of robust, rigorous peer review process, decided what to fund, took it through a scientific review board, etc., knew that it was high quality. But at that point, they were able to go out to patient organisations and say, both in the UK and overseas, and say, do you want to be part of it? And the CEO always tells me, the logos on the thank you and acknowledgement slides from the researchers are all the same size. So it really doesn't matter what you can contribute, but just being part of that. I think the other thing that's really important about that is then raising the profile with the research community to say, we're keen, we're here, we're interested. So you can sort of use somebody else's branding to then be part of that consortium of funding that will then help you establish your name and your priorities going forward. So thinking particularly about this sort of really early stage of influencing and setting the priorities, I wanted to flag the James Lind Alliance Priority Setting Partnerships. And at the bottom, there are 2 links there, and I will circulate the slides afterwards for you to have a look. But overall, they're hugely popular with our member charities. 78 members, that's about 50%, have been involved with one. But they are quite time consuming. So basically what the process is that a very tightly scoped area of research is defined. So it may be a subset of the condition that you're looking at or care about. And then within that, they ask the community for what the priorities should be in this area and whittle them down to 10. There can be hundreds at play at different points. And what the James Lind Alliance Priority Setting Partnership does is to understand the prioritization of those issues to different groups. So that would include clinicians, patients, charities, just other members of the public, and everyone can have a say on it. But they also confirm that this research hasn't happened yet. So it's about identifying gaps. And they will come up with the top 10 list, which then goes into NIHR and other funders. And then people can decide which bits they may choose to take up. So I have seen charities then base their strategy around potentially 3 or 4 of these priorities. And many of our charities are actually now on their sort of second round of it, having used it to inform a sort of 5-year strategy. So there are different roles that you can take in priority setting partnerships, from co-funding one, and Rick pointed out a call about funding for them from NIHR at the moment. You can be a steering group member, and often we see either a charity member or a trustee holding that role. Many of our charities have been the secretariat. It is time consuming, but it allows you to provide capacity and input without necessarily providing funding. Or you can respond to a PSP. So I'd encourage you to have a look at what's open at the moment, what's reporting on, and see if you can get your community to put in some responses to it. So finally, we did a partnership festival a couple of years ago, and so I just wanted to flag that we have some tips around how to partner. So what you need to think about when setting up partnering: in the pink, in the orange, in the purple, sustaining it, and then evaluating and monitoring it. So I'd encourage you to look at that. So I know that's the end of my slides, but while I was listening to everybody else, I also jotted down a couple of notes. And I think for me, one of the key things here is, don't think that you need to fund it to be involved. There are many different ways, and there are also ways for you to provide funding that don't require you to set up the machinery of a research funding charity. And if you are going to fund it, I think about how you partner with others and how you ensure that you have robust processes so that the money is well spent. I would encourage you, as Rick said, to think what you're worth. Often it can feel like we're doing this for our patient communities and it's really vital, and so it's part of our mission, so we end up doing it. But we already have a shoestring budget to work with. And so thinking really hard how we get that recognition of the vital role and the compensation for it is key. And then I think my final thing would be to say, think about what we need to do to get more research in this area. So is this that we need more questions and the priority setting partnerships, or do we need more data? And that's where some of your roles in registries and others can come up. So I will stop sharing there and hand back over to Rick.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you adding those extra thoughts in response to the prior presentations as well. I thought some really great points there. And I just wanted to highlight as well that example you showed of the charity kind of funding leading the funding ecosystem. I think was one that was really interesting when we chatted before. And it's something that's easy to forget, that we have a role in the the charity sector and the patient community actually of leadership in the funding space as well. And actually, you know, where you lead with the right evidence, the right support, others will follow. And I think that's quite a powerful thing to be aware of and think about. So thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to very briefly just show a slide I put together on what I think you guys can do now. And then I think we'll dive into a quick bit of discussion around some of the questions that are popping up in the Q&A. And we'll certainly be asking both Katrina and Katie about their thoughts on the James Lind Alliance process, if that sounds okay to you both. So I'll let you gather your thoughts on that while I try and find myself a slide. Share that, and I'll make sure my question panel isn't visible. Right, so the aim here is just to say, what can you do now? What are the next steps for organisations like you listening, saying, okay, that all sounds great, what do I practically do? And that's always a tough thing to think about and consider. For me, I think the first thing to really think about as an organisation is, what is your strategy with regard to research? What are the things that you're really trying to achieve? What are the changes you're trying to make? And if you can define those, it gives you a simple set of guiding principles about how you should act and engage. So yeah, what do you want to achieve? What resources and connections do you currently have that might allow you to engage in research in a different way? And where are the places where you think with those resources and those connections, you can already have some influence and make an impact in the research space? If you can just capture that and define that, it gives you a really clear structure to make those decisions when opportunities present themselves, or an idea of where to target to find the opportunities that you can really have impact in. So always key to understand what your strategy should be. Similarly, go and talk to the people you know already. You know, not knowing who they are is great, but talking to them, engaging with them gives you a chance to identify opportunities that might be upcoming on the horizon, or to explore different opportunities alongside them, and that might open up new doors for research funding. So making sure you have the chance to also see what patient and public involvement activities they're currently doing, maybe in a grant that's peripheral to what you're up to. That could be a simple chance for you as an organisation to do one small event or activity that demonstrates your value and gains your experience in that patient and public involvement space, that you can then use to influence how you write or propose activities like this in the future, or to generate a kind of stream of activity you can follow up down the line. Try and build up some kind of data set. And this could be a full-blown registry, which I know everyone's struggling to find ways to move forward with and fund, but it could just be running a survey. Fundamentally, what all patient groups have is access to knowledge and lived experience about that rare condition. And if you can find a way to capture some of that in some manner that you can then use to reflect back to potential collaborators, funders, or researchers, that gives you instant value and access to information they just don't have. And demonstrating that value will open doors that can allow you to move forward, influencing the research landscape, but also just supporting bids in a really meaningful, impactful way that do what I say earlier, demonstrate the need of your community. And that's why you can really help. And I think really importantly, understand your resource needs. And I think, again, this echoes what Katrina's just said and the point I was trying to make. It's really easy to try and do everything. And I've always tried to do everything, and it never really works. You have to try and understand what you can do, what you need to do something. And the resource absolutely means money, but it means time as well. What time have you actually got, and what are you able to commit to make the impact you're trying to deliver? We all want to be ambitious, and it's great to be ambitious. But ultimately getting yourself in a position where you're in a grant with deliverables that you want to achieve, but you haven't got the time or the funding to get there, isn't going to serve the community you're going to serve. It's going to burn you out and set you backwards. So trying to understand the need you might have and being able to go to people who are approaching you for bids or opportunities you have, to actually have a basis for the ask you're making around time and money is crucial. And in those rare cases where I've done reviews on grants, often I've seen the tiniest part of the grant and the large bid is the bit that the patient group have put in to ask for a little bit of money to do a huge amount of work. And it's a fraction of the bid. We can afford to be bold and ask for a little bit more to reflect the value of the work we're bringing. None of those feel like intuitively stuff that's pushing research forward, but it's all about building your basis and your understanding to be able to engage with opportunities you can find, to create opportunities, and to give yourself the quickest, simplest, and most effective way to have impact early on. So I hope that something there is helpful and triggers for you guys. With that, what I might do is just ask Katie and Katrina to pop their cameras back on. And I'd love to get your thoughts, guys, on a bit more on the James Lind Alliance process. I thought Katrina gave a really nice overview on it. And we've had a few questions in the Q&A that are talking about how people should think about and consider these. So, firstly, Katie, you said you weren't there when it was done, which is absolutely fair enough. But based on your experience, have you got an idea of how that's influenced or being used by Lily and as a basis for the work that you've moved forward? And do you feel that the priorities identified are being addressed in the work you're now involved with?
Yeah, so I was just having a little refresh of my memory of what the 10 are, just because it's been, obviously I wasn't involved originally. But absolutely, I think when you look at them, a lot of the 10 that came up, there is a lot of overlap in terms of what's happening now, especially in, I mentioned the three main areas, which are quite broad titles for the Life Arc Centre in terms of diagnosis, biomarkers, and new treatments. And for example, there is a PSP point all around biomarkers. There's another one about gene therapy and whether gene therapy could potentially be of use in mitochondrial disease. And gene therapy is one of the key areas that they're looking to develop treatments in for that. So I think, in terms of the Life Arc Centre, I can see definitely where the priorities have been taken into account and brought forward. But also we see it in some of our previous research funding calls or other applications where we get asked to lend support, like you say, a letter of support, for example. And I think filtering through now, it's been a few years since that PSP was done. Within the applications you see, I've checked the James Lind PSP, and this is an area of priority, and this is why I want to look into it, because it's important to patients.
Thanks, Katie. That's brilliant. And Katrina, thank you for covering off your thoughts on it, and seeing that many being done within AMRC is quite striking. I don't know how much you've seen or engaged with them, but I just wonder what your take on the influence they might have had to those organisations might be. And there are groups here that have always been toying with the idea of exploring it, but there is a large cost and burden associated with it. So people are trying to think about ways to maybe investigate doing something like it themselves. How might, you think that might be responded to, and what might the impact of the proper version be in your experience?
I think the value of the James Lind Alliance does have that sort of credibility with it. But I think that the Delphi, it does use a Delphi method. So, and that method is just a ability to create consensus over time. So the thing I've always struggled with about doing Delphis online, and this is from my prior experience before I came into the charity sector, is that you need to get a group of people to engage and have a discussion, which takes time. So you need them to be really bought in, and then you need them to review everybody else's discussion and come back with their new revised view if they've moved. So it's quite time consuming, but I think if you have a very engaged community, there's no reason that you can't do it through a survey software or that sort of thing. So there definitely are ways to do it. I wanted to speak about the sort of time taken on it and what if new information comes along. I think that's one of the things with the James Lind Alliance is they really will look at what's the status of the system at the moment. And therefore, what is it? There may be, breakthroughs, but if we think about it, a research project is roughly going to take 3 years. It's going to be 4 to 5 from that beginning point, so maybe an additional 2 before we see it published. And so it's an iterative process. So I wouldn't worry so much about the information that may come along during it, because I think the questions we're exploring is where there is a dearth of research or a lack of it, rather than a possibility of applying existing knowledge. But that's why it's key to get your question right at the beginning of the PSP or that sort of review. And in general, we would encourage charities to look at that when they think about their research strategy. So you could do a PSP to identify the gaps. Alternatively, you could do a literature search and say, there's no evidence on this, which is why it's also important that we're publishing openly and things so that we can find this. And then I think it's about thinking, what's your USP in this space? So is this because there is no money in here? We're putting some money in and we're putting it into basic disease, which may be covered by other funders, but just doesn't get high enough up their agenda? Or is it that we're actively taking a specific stance, saying, no, that is your problem in that bit, and we're going to do something different?
Thanks, Katrina. I think that's some brilliant advice and really clear about how you should think about these things and approach it. I think, yeah, from what I've said as well, the earlier question I think from Anne was, should you try and do something, outside of the James Lind Alliance to try and get somewhere? And I think within rare disease, it's always important to think about, is there a way to move things a little bit forward and make that step? And it may be that if you can do something that starts to give you some priorities in some manner, that's a good step. When you're doing that, how wide can you survey? Can you make sure you're asking patients, but can you survey the clinicians as well to bring different opinion in? Can you maybe find a collaborator or some pro bono support from a consultancy to help with that Delphi methodology to, again, give it more robustness? How far along can you get independently to get as much validity and robustness behind your methodology to give what you're doing as much impact as possible? That's the approach we always want to be following up. And it may well be there's a funding bid out there you can apply for to get one done properly, and that might be the right approach. But it's finding that way to make a little step forward is the approach I try and follow. But I absolutely agree with what Katrina said, that the name adds a certain weight to the result, and that means it's there and available for others to pull in, and that's going to have a certain impact in driving interest to your area. Go on, Katrina.
And I think the independence of the experts from JLA who work on it. So there are people that do these sorts of engagement, for a living, and so there's, they'll have seen similar issues cropping up in different diseases. So I think there is something about how we can either learn from those that have already been through the process or those advisors.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we've got for a few more minutes. I'm not seeing other major questions. I just wondered, Katie, if you want to say a few words. This question, you've answered it in chat about the impact committee and how it's structured and works and the role it has in Lilly.
Yeah, definitely. So we set it up last year, like I say, as EPIC. And really the idea was that because we are a national charity, we wanted to make sure that the committee was virtual and to be able to be as kind of accessible and inclusive as possible. Saying that, obviously appreciate the difficulties that some people have with kind of accessing digital, digital committees like that. So that's something that we're working on as well. But at the moment, it is a virtual online committee. And basically what happens is that if people are interested in mitochondrial disease research and helping to shape that, they can sign up to be part of the committee. And then what happens is that researchers come along with an application. I'll obviously meet with them, discuss how patient involvement can be meaningful and how it can help improve their application. And then once us at the Lilly Foundation are happy with the research and the project and the idea, then we'll begin kind of a matchmaking process with finding the researchers and the right people for that project. And often it's a case of a little bit backwards and forwards with the researcher to find out, what sort of level of experience, what sort of mitochondrial disease patient, how much of a medical or science or research background they might have had. Try and get like a really diverse mix of people to match basically the researcher with the project, so that when those kind of involvement opportunities happen, the researcher's getting kind of a well-rounded range of views about the project. And really the idea is that the researcher, it's about what the researcher can learn from the people with the lived experience as well as vice versa. And it's been quite sort of small scale up to now, but we have run about 4 or 5 projects in the last year. And every one of them, I think they've been kind of mutually beneficial for both the researcher and the patients. So for the patients and the families, they love the opportunity to learn more about the research, to understand maybe if the research isn't going to actually directly influence their lives, but even just that idea that there's researchers working in the field to advance that knowledge and understanding. And also, for the researchers, it's about getting them to think a little bit differently. So thinking from the patient's point of view, what might be important to them that they haven't even considered, what practical things that they've put in the protocol might not make sense to a person who's living with mitochondrial disease, all those kind of finer details. And sometimes it can even help the research kind of go in a slightly different direction. So we've got a big project ongoing now about diagnostics again, but actually as kind of a spin-off project there's now going to be a separate survey going on about actually the experience of getting that diagnosis and how we can improve that. So although the actual main project was about increasing rates of diagnosis, the spin-off EPIC project is, and how is that delivered effectively and sensitively, and how that affects people's relationships with mitochondrial disease going forward. Because if somebody's had a good diagnosis, how does that change things in relationships with healthcare providers, for example?
Thank you, Katie. It sounds really impressive and exciting as well. So I'm excited to follow it a bit more over the coming years and see what impact you have. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think we're pretty much there based on the questions we've got. I think we've touched on most things that have been raised. So thank you all for your questions. And if you have anything else you want to say and shout out, do get in touch. Briefly from me, thank you to both Katie and Katrina for brilliant talks. I've really enjoyed the session and got a lot from it. And I hope across these two webinars, you can see we've tried to give a really good understanding to the patient community of what the ways you can define research, the ways and types of funding that is out there, how you can try and engage with that research funding, but also how you can influence the space in general. And it isn't just about either providing funding or supporting grants, but actually thinking about the way you can push things forward to advance things for your community. And that's always the aim we want to have as rare disease patient groups. So yeah, thanks from me. And with that, I'll hand back to Gabrielle, who will no doubt share some exciting opportunities with Beacon coming forward. So thank you, Gabrielle.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you, everyone, coming for all your questions. And again, thank you, Rick, Katrina, and Katie for answering them. So I'm just going to continue sharing my screen. And just to let you know what's coming up next here at Beacon. So just adding some further information on what Rick was just saying. Like, obviously, this was a webinar series. We started in December. Part 1 you can find on the Resources Hub as a recording, and we'll be sending the slides of Part 2 really soon and uploading the recording as well in the same resource probably next week. And moving on to what's coming up at Beacon, we're going to have another leadership masterclass. We had them as well last year. So please keep your eyes out for emails, because we'll be in touch with further information soon. We're also having an in-person masterclass happening in London in the Royal Institution. This is going to happen on the 20th of March of 2025. And it's going to be about public speaking. So if you're interested, please come along, go on our website where you can find further information as well. But I believe Hannah is going to send some links as well for you to click and be able to find everything that you need about this event. We are also co-organizers of the International Drug Repurposing Conference that's taking place again this year in May in Amsterdam on the 7th and 8th. So again, I would like to encourage you to have a look if you're especially interested in drug repurposing, and go on the drug repurposing, the Drug Repurposing Conference website, where you can find all of our information. And we're also going to have another webinar, again, as part of Remedy for All at the end of the month, on the 29th of January, where we're going to introduce the Remedy for All Digital Academy. And for those of you that probably haven't heard of this before, it's this educational platform that we've built with our partners in Remedy for All on drug repurposing, trying to educate researchers, patient groups, academics, pharma, policymakers on drug repurposing, from concept to market, going through different stages. So if you haven't been able to do so, I would encourage you to go on the Academy and explore it. Of course, it's free and accessible. And we're going to have an introductory webinar explaining what it is and how it's going to develop over the next few months and years on the 29th of January. We're also going to have another webinar on clinical trials. That's going to be on the 21st of February. And again, you can find information on the link that Hannah will be sending. And lastly, of course, feedback is really important for us, especially for us to keep running our events. So we would really, really appreciate if you can spend 2 minutes of your time filling out our survey. The survey on this webinar, just telling us your thoughts, and you'll be redirected to it once we end this webinar. So thank you, everyone, for doing that. And of course, thank you for coming. Really excited to see you in future events. Again, I hope that you found this webinar useful. And please keep an eye out on the Leadership Masterclass and on everything else. And we'll follow up with our slides and the recording next week. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good day. Bye.